What if the reason that you still feel stuck after years of healing work isn't because there's something deeper that you haven't yet uncovered, but because the healing itself has become another way that you've learned to stay in survival mode? The truth and the reality is that at some point, we have to stop treating ourselves like a problem to solve. Because the goal in all of this, the goal in healing was never to spend the rest of our lives being our own personal fixing project. The goal was to become safe enough in our bodies that we could finally or eventually start living again. Welcome back, my friend, to the Body First Healing Podcast. I am your host, Britt Piper. So as you know, every week we explore healing through the lens of the nervous system, because healing is not just about understanding yourself differently. It's about giving your body new experiences that allow it to begin relating to life differently. I am so grateful that you're here. And honestly, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because I feel like this is a topic that I have been diving into more, not just in my personal life, but also it's something that I feel really passionate talking about on social media and within my community and circle of friends. So today's conversation is for the person who has done so much work on themselves and is starting to quietly wonder why they still don't feel the way that they thought they would. So maybe you've been in therapy for years, right? Maybe you have read the books, you understand your patterns, your attachment patterns, you know your trauma responses. You likely at this point know the nervous system language. You can probably identify like when you're in fight or flight, when you're shutting down, fawning, and even when those old wounds get activated, you can consciously observe it in the moment. People on this path usually participate in things like somatic work, breath work, retreats, EMDR, coaching, parts work, right? And all of this incredible, beautiful work has given you something meaningful. And yet, somewhere along the way, healing became a full-time job for you. You might find that if you're on this path, that there seems to always be another pattern to uncover or another trigger to understand. Maybe there's another part that emerges that you need to work with, or a program that's going to promise you to take you deeper. For me, it was always the books, right? There's another book that was sitting on my nightstand, or a podcast episode that I had saved and I needed to make sure that I got to because I thought it was going to tell me something that I hadn't addressed yet. And if this is landing with you, I want to be really clear before we go any further, okay? Because I'm not criticizing healing work. I mean, obviously, I'm probably quite the opposite. I'm the biggest proponent of it, right? My entire career is built around helping people heal. I believe deeply in therapy. I believe deeply in somatic work. And I believe in it with such a deep passion because it changed my life and because every day I get the opportunity to watch other people's lives change because they finally have that language, the support, the tools, and these corrective experiences for things that they had maybe been carrying alone for decades. I say that while at the same time, I also think that there comes a point where we have to ask a really uncomfortable question. What if the thing that helped you survive one chapter of your life is now keeping you from entering the next one? And what if healing can become one of those things? So by the end of today's episode, my hope is that you'll understand the difference between healing that is helping you build greater safety and capacity, and healing that has quietly become another form of hypervigilance and self-management, so that you can recognize when it might be time to stop searching for what is wrong and start participating in the life that all of this work was supposed to give back to you. All right, guys, so let's jump in. First of all, I just want to give us kind of like this core reframe, okay? One of the things that I have learned after years of doing this work is that healing has phases. And I think that we get into trouble when we assume that the tools or the practices that were necessary in one phase are supposed to become our permanent way of life. Now, there is absolutely a phase of healing where we need to turn toward ourselves, where maybe we do need to understand what happened. Maybe we do need to stabilize the nervous system and build resources and recognize our outdated survival responses. Maybe we have to work on learning how to set boundaries and develop a greater capacity for emotion. And ultimately, all of that really kind of circles around this theme of giving our body the experience of safety, perhaps that it didn't have before. Okay, that work matters, and it is the bedrock. It's the foundation of somatic and trauma and nervous system healing work. But safety was never supposed to be the final destination. It is the foundation. So eventually, the question has to change from how do I keep myself safe, or how do I begin to finally feel safe, to what do I want to do with the safety that I've built? Because the truth is, the second phase of healing is not more healing. It's actually aliveness. And I think a lot of us get stuck at that threshold. Now let's talk about how we get to this place where healing kind of becomes just another survival strategy. I think one of the reasons that this happens is because healing can become incredibly, let's say, seductive, okay? It can become seductive to a nervous system that learned to survive through vigilance, through control, through perfectionism or self-monitoring. Okay, just think about it. If you spent years learning that your safety depended on anticipating what could go wrong, or understanding everyone around you, or staying one step ahead, or managing other people's emotions, you don't necessarily lose that strategy simply because you enter therapy. You can kind of think of it like sometimes the strategy is just changing clothes. So instead of monitoring everyone else, as an example, you start monitoring yourself. And the question then isn't, is everyone okay with me? Instead, it quietly becomes, am I regulated enough? Instead of obsessing over whether you said the wrong thing, you obsess over whether your reaction came from intuition or trauma. And for those of us who are recovering perfectionists, right, instead of being the perfect daughter, friend, partner, mother, that perfectionism turns into becoming the perfectly healed person. And so it's in this chapter, it's in this season that healing has become just another environment where your nervous system believes that safety exists somewhere just beyond the next thing that you have to fix, right? Once I heal this attachment wound, then I'll be ready. Once I stop getting triggered by this, then I'll be ready. Then I'll trust myself. Once I understand why I do X, Y, and Z, then I can get into relationships again. And how that shows up practically in the healing space is once I finish this program, once I read this book, once I work through this memory or understand this pattern, then I will live. And I think we have to be just really careful here because there's always going to be something to work on. Always, right? You are a human being. You are not going to arrive at a version of yourself who is never activated, never afraid, never insecure or sad or jealous or overwhelmed. Okay, that person doesn't exist. And if that becomes the unconscious finish line for healing, then you will spend the rest of your life preparing to live instead of actually living. Now, I see this especially in people who are very self-aware. They can explain every response that they have. They know exactly where it came from. They can trace it back to childhood. They can know which part is activated, what attachment pattern is showing up. And I'm not saying that work isn't important, because that's half of the work that we do in the Body First Healing Program, right? Attachment work, parts work, core wounds work. So sometimes that awareness is incredibly freeing. But sometimes awareness becomes surveillance. We start watching ourselves so closely that we stop inhabiting ourselves. And so how that shows up is every sensation becomes data, right? Every emotion becomes something that we have to interpret. And every uncomfortable response or activation that we have, it becomes evidence that there still must be something to heal or work to do. And so that internal tracking and hypervigilance can keep the nervous system oriented toward the exact same question that it was asking in survival, which is, what's wrong and what do I need to do to make sure that I'm okay? Okay, the question is still there. Although the language has changed, the underlying orientation to fix, solve, war against is still there. So let's talk about this second phase, okay? This phase of aliveness. Now, I think we need a much bigger conversation about what happens after stabilization. Okay, because that first phase of nervous system work is often about helping the body to experience enough safety so that it no longer has to organize every moment around protection. And so we do that by maybe learning to notice activation without immediately becoming consumed by it. We can learn how to come back after stress. And in that process, we develop more flexibility between our nervous system states, right? We can build capacity for sensations and emotions that once felt unbearable. And that can begin this beautiful process where we start to recognize that discomfort doesn't automatically mean danger, right? That an old survival strategy is sometimes just showing up in a present day situation that no longer requires it because it's just now outdated. And so that is beautiful work. But the purpose of building that capacity is to eventually use it, right? Capacity isn't proven. It isn't put into practice by how calm you can become in your bedroom while you're doing some kind of somatic or nervous system practice, okay? Capacity is revealed when you bring your body into your actual life, into difficult moments of your life, like when you're having that difficult conversation, when you're falling in love and feel scared, when you take that trip, even though you haven't left your home in so long, when you let someone disappoint you and you discover that you can stay connected to yourself anyway. And when we talk about aliveness, we're not only just talking about discomfort, we're also talking about the capacity to be with what feels good, right? When you laugh so hard that you lose track of time, or you actually feel joy and you stay in the joy without immediately wondering how long it's going to last. That's where healing begins to become aliveness. And I think that this distinction really matters because safety and aliveness are related, but they are not identical. Okay, they are not the same thing. So a nervous system that has experienced chronic threat often needs safety first, right? Of course it does. But if we make safety synonymous with never, ever experiencing activation again, then what we're doing is we're accidentally creating a very small life, because aliveness, as I just gave examples for, is activating, right? Excitement, it raises our heart rate. Anticipation, fear, it gives you maybe butterflies, right? Intimacy and love can feel incredibly vulnerable. Building something meaningful like a career or a passion, that can be really stressful. And don't even get me started on parenting, right? For all of my parents out there, like parenting stretches you. Friendships, they can disappoint you. So being fully alive means allowing yourself to be affected by your life. So eventually, healing has to ask something different of us. Okay, the question cannot remain the same. It's not going to be, can I eliminate activation? But can I experience activation without abandoning myself? Okay, and those are two very different goals. We are not trying to create a life where nothing hurts. We are creating or fostering a resilient enough nervous system that knows how to stay with us when life does inevitably hurt. All right, my friends, let's take a moment for just a quick little somatic pause. Okay, before we go any further, I'm just going to invite you to notice something in your own body for a moment. Okay, we don't have to close our eyes to do this. You don't even need to change your breathing. But just for a moment here, can you allow yourself to arrive just wherever you already are? And just notice what happens in your body when I say these words, okay? There may not be anything else that you need to fix right now. There may not be anything else that you need to fix right now. And just notice what begins to shift, what begins to take place for you. Maybe it feels like relief in the body. Maybe you notice resistance. Maybe there's constriction, bracing, maybe settling, maybe breath. Perhaps there's a part of you that says, no, but you don't understand. I still do this. I still struggle with that. I still get activated here. That's okay. In this moment, we don't have to argue with that part. Okay, just inviting you to notice what it might believe would happen if you stopped working on yourself for just a little while. What would happen if for 1 week you didn't treat every difficult emotion as an assignment? What if you let an uncomfortable moment simply be an uncomfortable moment? What if you trusted that you could come back to the work when you genuinely needed it? And then for now, just notice the support beneath your body, whether that's the chair, the floor, the ground. Just let yourself receive even just 5% more of that support. All right, let's get back into the discussion. So I want to talk a little bit here just about the cost of staying in healing mode, okay? I think that one of the hardest parts about leaving the perpetual healing cycle is that eventually you lose the identity of being someone who's always working on themselves, right? And for some of us, that identity has felt incredibly safe because healing gives us something to do. It gives us structure and a sense that we're moving towards something. And sometimes it protects us from a much scarier question, which is, what do I actually want? Because once your life is no longer organized entirely around surviving the past, you have to begin choosing the future. And that can be very confronting. I honestly feel like I'm kind of in that season of my life right now where I'm realizing that certain things in my life were built around maybe old versions, old patterns of survival. right? So maybe for you, maybe you're finding like the relationship that made sense for the version of you who was constantly people pleasing. Maybe it doesn't make sense anymore. A career around proving your worth, and now that feels kind of empty. Maybe you realize that you've spent years choosing what was responsible or impressive or safe or expected of you, and you don't actually know now what feels alive for you. Now, it's important to say that that doesn't mean that the healing failed. Okay, sometimes that disorientation, like that period of destabilization where there's confusion, it's actually evidence that the healing is working. Because that means that you've stopped organizing your life around the old survival strategy, but you haven't yet fully built the life that comes after it yet. Okay, so that's where you kind of get into this liminal space between those two versions of you. And I think a lot of people misinterpret that space as being, quote, stuck. So when they get in that space, they go back to the healing. They assume there must be another wound or another book or another belief, another programmer, trauma response that's preventing them from moving forward, when sometimes there isn't another wound standing in the way. Sometimes you're simply standing at the edge of a life that you haven't practiced living yet. And the next step isn't actually more excavation. It is more curiosity and it's more participation. All right, so now you're probably like, okay, well, what do we do with this knowledge, Britt? What do we do with all of this that you're talking about? What's some practical integration here? Where does that leave us? Well, I think first of all, sometimes the most healing thing that we can do is stop consuming healing content for a little while. Okay, maybe it does mean to like turn off the podcast. I hope you don't turn off mine, but maybe you do. Maybe you need to take a break, right? Maybe we don't need to buy another book this week. Can we skip the retreat or the course or the explanation for why you are the way that you are? Maybe what you actually need is dinner with people who make you laugh, or that pottery class that you keep putting off. For me, it's been horseback riding and kickboxing and traveling, right? So can you get on the plane? Can you plant the garden? Can you go dancing? I've been going to a lot of concerts lately. Can you make or craft something and be really bad at it? Okay, fall in love. Like, let yourself want something without immediately analyzing where the desire came from. And I want to be really clear here, okay, that I'm not saying that we abandon support. There are seasons when we need therapy. There are absolutely moments when old material is going to resurface. And in those seasons, that deserves our attention. You can kind of think of it as like a tuning fork, right? Oftentimes, we're going to have to get back to the work to retune ourselves to this new life or these new iterations of life that we're constantly stepping into. So all that to say, healing is not linear, okay? And aliveness doesn't mean that we never return to the work. It just means that the work is no longer the center of our identity, right? We know how to return when we need it, and then we return to our lives. Okay, my friend, so if this resonated with you, I'm sure it touched into, kind of this raw, this open, this confronting wound. And I just want to give you some encouragement, some love. If you have done years of healing work and you still feel stuck, maybe the question isn't, what haven't I healed yet? Maybe the question is, what am I ready to live now? Like, what would you do differently if you stopped waiting to feel completely healed first? What relationship would you deepen? What would you create and put out into the world? Where would you go? What would you allow yourself to want? Because you did not do all of this work so that you could become exceptionally good at monitoring your nervous system. I know that's not your final goal, right? That was not the intention behind this. You did the work so that you could participate in your life, so that you could feel joy and feel grief and desire and disappointment and excitement and heartbreak without every sensation becoming evidence that something has gone wrong. Okay, you did it so that you could have more range, more capacity and choice, and ultimately more life. Okay, if there was a tagline for this episode, it would be that the opposite of survival isn't calm, it's aliveness. And maybe today, healing looks less like turning inward one more time and more like looking up, looking around, like noticing the life that is already happening for you and joining it. Okay, my friend, if this episode made you realize that you've been living in healing mode for a little too long, as always, my encouragement to you is to share it with someone who might need the same permission. And if you're still in that first phase, okay, where your body and your nervous system genuinely need support building safety and capacity and stabilizing and flexibility, then that is exactly the work that we do inside the Body First Healing Program. And for those of you who want to learn how to facilitate this work professionally and understand the nervous system at a much deeper level, you can always learn more about the Body First Healing Institute Somatic Practitioner Training. But just know that wherever you are in this process, the work was never supposed to become another cage. Okay, it was supposed to give you enough freedom to walk out of one. As always, thank you for letting me be a part of your healing journey. I will see you next week, guys, here on the Body First Healing Podcast. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into the Body First Healing Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with someone that you love. I'll see you back here next week, and until then, be gentle with yourself. You're doing the best you can with what you have, and that is more than enough. Just a quick note, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Always consult a qualified provider for personal support.